This is the place to find yourself.
Istanbul offers great universities and the lifestyle is really amazing here.
So I live at the dorms at Maltepe University and I'm really happy with it. There's a cleaning service every few days and then there's the library nearby which is open 24/7.
My first impression when I came was like, it's huge. You have everything in one place.
When you first come to Maltepe University, you don't know where what is, and you're like, oh my God, I need help. Guess what? You're not alone. There is the international office people over there. They're like family. They're very helpful, and they're always there for you.
Istanbul is the perfect mixture between ancient and modern. Coming into this city helps me discover myself, learn about so many different cultures, learning about the world, which will help me in writing future books.
At Maltepe University, we have a lot of research centers. Because of that, we have the ability to participate in a lot of international projects.
Here at Maltepe University, the education consists of both practical and theoretical. We get the opportunity to practice everything we learn in class in real life. So after we graduate, we have a degree and we can work all over the world.
People come to Istanbul all the time, but what they really miss when they visit are the antique shops, which contain thousands of years of memories and also a thread of the modern future.
I like to use every minute and just get out and hop on the ferry and just go from the Asian side to the European side and just enjoy the wonderful weather with the wonderful Bosphorus behind me and just enjoying the moment of Istanbul.
Istanbul is very beautiful with great culture.
This city is the symbol of diversity. Come and study at Maltepe University.
Come here and feel like you're home.
Say something?
Yes. You can go on. You can start.
You said she's not here though.
What?
You said she's
Okay, now.
Hello, welcome to the second session of our Congress. My name is Hana Kirjaj. I'm from the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in Maltepe University, and I'll be your moderator for this session. So I would like to begin by inviting our first presenter, Ms. Shabana Nikzad Hamidi from Herat University of Afghanistan, to give her presentation titled The Review of Effective Factors on Women's Empowerment, a Case Study, Herat City, Afghanistan. The floor is yours.
Hello, do you hear me?
Hello. Since we're having some internet connection problems with Shabana, we'll take the next presenter. So the next presentation belongs to Mr. Luke Lee, who is Luke Lee Stange from Tilan University, Estonia. His presentation is titled A Very Brief History of Collaborative City Making, Empowerment and Ecological Justice. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone who is tuning in. Appreciate your time. So my presentation is a very brief history of the future, a transformation story of collaborative city making, empowerment and ecological justice. Cities were once anthropocentrism writ large. Between 1980 and through to much of the 2020s, city making was dominated by the privileged few. Oligopolies run largely by men working within a mechanistic paradigm that was market-driven, exploitative, and destructive. With the absence of the wild, social and ecological injustices were most visible in cities. Through a matrix of domination, hegemonic normative power was wielded through institutions and discourse to oppress people through difference of all kinds, be that based on their race, gender, sexuality, class, physical or mental ability, or other such frames. These injustices were often compounded through intersectional oppressions. This same matrix was used to dominate and exploit the more than human world. It became a galvanizing principle of the ecological justice movement that for us to flourish, we need everybody and every ecology to flourish. Is the last day of 2059, making the 10th anniversary of global carbon neutrality. I thought it was a good day for us to reflect on just how much this ecological justice movement has accomplished. This world we know today would be unfathomable just a few decades ago. For posterity, I want to document some of the ways in which that happened. This kinder, gentler world was made possible after a wave of democracy reforms that saw voices from the margins being pushed front and center. This is the story of how an ecological collapse was averted. It is the story of democracy reborn. Having been fortunate to be able to meet some of the amazing organizers and facilitators involved in the movement, I want to share a little about how I saw it unfold. This is not a story about superheroes, but super collaborators, about cooperation, understanding, and mutual respect. These are but a handful of the organizations and people who did what they could to bridge the divides and pull those at the margins to the center. Let us remind ourselves of where we have come from. I want to take you back to the 20s. The climate crisis had begun. The International Panel on Climate Change in 2022 was clear. Human and ecosystem vulnerability are interdependent. They cited the tragedy of humanitarian crises where climate hazards interact with vulnerability. Impacts in cities were felt most in the economically and socially marginalized urban residents. The World Economic Inequality Report of that same year reported that little progress had been made over the past 2 centuries. Over that period, 10% over half of the world's total income, whilst the bottom half earned just between 5 and 15%. Despite decades of consternation and hand-wringing, the world was like a giant South Africa during apartheid. The World Economic Forum estimated we're on track to achieve income parity for women in July 2156. Globally, women in 2020 were still earning 20% less than for every woman in parliament, there were 3 men. Votes for legislation had men outnumbering women by 3 to 1. Closing the imbalance in power was said to take many more years than closing the gender pay gap. It was a time when democracy across the globe was in decline. Then only 6.4% of people lived in a country with full democracy. In March 2022, global food prices were at an all-time high. Whilst advances in technology ensured food production kept growing, it was estimated that they could have been over 20% higher if it were not for climate heating. On an American diet, there would have been enough food to feed just 1/3 of the population. In that period, 200 million birds and mammals were slaughtered for the dining tables of the world every single day. In the same period, greenhouse gas emissions from the animal industrial complex exceeded emissions from passenger transport globally. Wild animals suffered too. By 2020, the population of mammals, birds, reptiles, fish, and amphibians had dropped by 2/3 of what it was 50 years prior. In this 6th extinction wave, we were losing species fast, 1,000 times faster than the norm. That meant a species was lost every 3 days. In 2020, when I asked zoologist Professor Andrea Manica about our prospects, she left the door open. Whether these past trends in habitat range losses will reverse, continue, or accelerate will depend on future global carbon emissions and societal choices in the coming years and decades. It all depends on what we do next. Two years later, I met up with Sir Robert Watson. At that time, he was chair of the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. He told me that not all was lost. We just needed transformational change. What does that mean precisely? I pressed. So Watson answered, a fundamental, system-wide reorganization across technological, economic, and social factors, including paradigms, goals, and values. Elementary, dear Watson. Such optimism was the norm for the environmentalists I knew. We shared a common naivete. Without this character flaw, this transformation that Sir Watson taunted me with may not have happened. Few at that time predicted it. However, an awareness grew in the global consciousness that inequalities thrived where democracies were weak. Some argued that this was the key to what Sir Watson was talking about. The transition was not linear, but momentum grew nonetheless. History is full of those who realize the injustices need to be fought, not selectively, but all and everywhere. For instance, in England in the early part of the 20th century, many who fought for justice, unionists, socialists, suffragettes, considered it cruel to kill animals for food. Lady Constance Lytton, for instance, was one such suffragette who made herself vomit up the beef tea she was force-fed in prison. Intersectional activism did not begin with suffragettes. A Jewish man was expelled from the RSPCA in London, England in 1824. Louis Compertz was said to be a kindly, passionate, bird-like man. Compertz was a radical. He railed against capitalism and fought vehemently for the rights of women and animals. His crime, you might ask? Unlike the RSPCA, Compertz did not tolerate speciesism. He neither ate, wore, or rode on animals. He was a writer and inventor seeking to reduce the suffering of animals. Wanting to free horses from slavery, Compertz worked on the early precursor to the bicycle. He was a vegan a century before the word was coined. Not only was he a founding member of the animal justice movement, Compertz was a founding member of the ecological justice movement, what we know today as the movement. Later, pioneers of the movement understood the importance of fighting for people, animals, and the environment. A feminist vegan, American philosopher, academic, and activist, Angela Davis campaigned tirelessly since the 1970s in an intersectional way and worked for another 50 years on. Davis adamantly believed that injustices were intertwined with the common causes and needed to be called out. Following in Davis's footsteps, Christopher Sebastian McGedders continued the legacy in the 2010s and 20s, doing great work in spreading the movement's justice message. He worked tirelessly across fields, teaching at Columbia University about speciesism, working at the Peace Advocacy Network, as well as in an animal rescue sanctuary, and with Black Vegans Rock and A Well-Fed World. Through his lectures, McGedders was instrumental in highlighting how understanding animal justice issues could be helpful in understanding LGBTQI rights. Lauren Ornelas was another such pioneer. Almost 2 centuries after Compert's campaign against speciesism, Ornelas founded the Food Empowerment Project in 2007 to highlight the intersectional injustice nexus of animal abuse, environmental degradation, unfair labor conditions for agricultural workers, and lack of healthy food in low-income areas of the United States. These were but 3 names of the thousands who played a part in galvanizing the movement. At least as early as the 1970s, scholars and activists in critical universal urban design and Henry Lefebvre's Right to the City movement noted the importance of collaborative governance with a catch cry, nothing about us without us. 50 years later, however, participatory urban planning remained exclusive. Few marginalized voices were included. In the 1990s, Marta Suplicy was a psychiatrist educated at Stanford University who gave sex advice on a popular TV show in Brazil. She was elected mayor of Sao Paulo at the dawn of the 21st century. Suplicy's government oversaw the largest and most inclusive people's budget for the time. Even decades later, it was rare for people's budgets to be ever over 4% of total expenditure. But in Sao Paulo, They devoted almost 2/3 of their total budget, and that amounted to in 360 million in US dollars back in 2003. Unlike its Brazilian neighbors, Porto Alegre, Sao Paulo's people's budgets had a direct positive discrimination element built in. However, it was not through mandating quotas, but by giving vulnerable groups a disproportionately higher representation. Participatory budget participants appointed representatives amongst themselves. 9 vulnerable groups were identified. Whilst most representatives required 20 votes, vulnerable groups required between 1 to 5. People who identified themselves as having a disability or homeless or indigenous person only needed 1 vote to be delegate. They could vote in themselves, while other vulnerable groups needed 2 to 5 votes. While not immediately replicated, Sao Paulo's inspired many other cities to find creative ways to make collaborative governance practices truly inclusive for everyone. Whilst political change was once sought at the ballot box, innovations in the digital realm helped make democracy happen in real time. The movement formed organically as a democratic spirit filtered through society at all levels. To ensure their workers' future, unions from the fossil fuel industry worked hand in hand with environmental groups to secure the financing needed to shut down polluting power stations and open renewable energy plants. The Mining and Energy Union played a key role in ending Australia's dependence on the coal industry. In 2025, the union morphed into Australia's largest workers' cooperative, empowering its 20,000 members to run the country's largest renewable energy company. Worker cooperatives were once niche became the norm. Banks shrank as the popularity of finance cooperatives boomed. This enabled disparate social movements to coalesce, honing and amplifying the will of the people in ways that could no longer be ignored. Through these kinds of collaborations, cooperatives, and micro-utopian projects, the movement overcame injustices inch by inch, neighbourhood by neighbourhood, city by city. If governments wanted to stay in power, they had to take action, action that made a meaningful difference to the neighbourhood, a difference the community could see and feel. Communities did not simply ask politely, but demanded as if their future depended on it. As for many, it did. Global coordination through thousands of community groups saw protests of unprecedented proportions. Guerrilla actions from gardening to street calming gave people a greater sense of ownership over their neighbourhood. Micro-utopias, community-led town halls, citizens' assemblies, and people's budgets brought disparate people and ideas together through deliberation, engaging people with democracy like they'd never done before. This culminated in global strikes in key sectors that was so loud, the call for systematic change reverberated through the floor of Wall Street and the halls of Downing Street. This brief history covered but a sliver of the magnitude of the people, ideas, and actions that turned city making upside down. Learning from history has shown that there were 2 keys to ushering in a more collaborative city: deepening democracy and taking a holistic view of injustice. Deepening democracy meant that those at the margins had their voices pushed front and center. Their empowerment came through their inclusion in democratic processes. Taking a holistic view meant campaigning not on one injustice at a time, but all injustices all the time. I will leave you with the words of American inventor, Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to Mr. Luke Lee for your presentation. And I'd like to ask now if there are any questions. Anybody have questions for us? Okay. Okay, we'll now take our next presenter, Ms. Shabana Naqzad Hamidi from Herat University of Afghanistan, to give her presentation titled The Review of Effective Factors on Women's Empowerment, a case study from Herat City, Afghanistan. The floor is yours.
Hello to all. I hope all is well with you. Thanks for giving me a chance. The first I faced with electric issues. I want to present my article that's about women's empowerment. The subject of this article is about review of effective factors on women's empowerment. Abstract of these articles: empowerment as process in which women realize their inner needs and desires to reinforce the goal on their own and reveal the capabilities necessary to fulfill their desires. The purpose of this research is to review effective factors to women's empowerment. The theoretical framework of this research is the theory of women's empowerment that has been influenced by feminist theories, especially the theory of liberal feminism. This research has been done by an analytical statistic method about 520 women between 20 to 50 years old in Arab province of Afghanistan. The funding of this study suggests that factors of such as increased level of education, access to financial resource, improved health, removal of the prejudice in the labor market, and the removal of traditional factors are the most common factors that affect women's empowerment. The key of these articles is women empowerment, development, conscious, and feminism. Introduction. Next slide, please. Today, many countries in the world want to achieve development. The development plans pursued in these countries are usually the same ones proposed by Western sociologists of politicians. In many of these plans, the status of women wasn't considered for a long time, or in some way it was performed, which worsened the situation of women. Recent studies have shown that achieving sustainable development is not possible without the active participation of women in all areas, whether economic, social, and so on. Therefore, in order to achieve comprehensive development, how can the abilities of women to actively participate in the affairs of the country be expanded? The continue of introductions. Next slide, please. Next. The purpose of this study, conducted in Herat province of Afghanistan, is to examine ways that increase women's empowerment so that women can recognize what they are now and what they can be in the future, and strengthen their capabilities in all areas. Empowerment of women is possible in two ways. First, removing barriers that hinder women's activities and the editions increase their ability and capability. Accordingly, in this article, the impact of factors such as increasing education, access to financial resource, improving health, elimination of discrimination from the labor market, and elimination of traditional beliefs in women's empowerment have been studied. Next, theoretical framework. Experts have offered various definitions for women's empowerment. Empowerment means that people should believe in a level, that people should achieve a level of personal development that allows them to choose based on their desires. Said Shadi Taleb. Liberal feminist theory. Liberal feminists believe that a decent society should provide the greatest opportunities for the development of individual talents, and that those opportunities should be available to all. In liberal political theories, individual values are manifested in the demand for freedom and equality. Next, please. Also, liberal feminists believe that women should have the same rights as men in education and the right of choice and be elected, even in the case of politics, and receive equal pay for equal work and participate in various fields. Next. Next, please. Research method, please. The research method of these articles is about describe statistic and simply random sampling. The statistic population of these studies includes all women between the ages of 20 and 50 living in arid province in the years of 2022. Findings of the research. Next slide. In this study, the impact of variables on increasing the level of education, access to financial resource, improving health, eliminating discrimination in the labor market, and eliminating traditional beliefs in the empowerment variables has been investigated. So the main factors that affect on women empowerment are education, accessing to financial resource, health, elimination to discrimination in the labor market, and elimination of traditional beliefs. For definition and findings of each factors or variables, the effect of education on women's empowerment. About 14 questions were measured in liquid skills, and through these findings that present study showed that among variables such as educational level, access to financial resource, elimination of discrimination in the labor market, and elimination of traditional beliefs, the education factors has the most direct impact on other variable has an indirect impact on women empowerment. In this study, most women were in the middle level of literacy and education. By gaining more knowledge and study, women have felt more empowered in the society, including being absorbed in the labor market, especially in the job as of teacher. The second factor, access of finance on women empowerment. The impact of access of financial resource on women's empowerment. Women who have access to financial resource, especially through their jobs, have a higher level of accessibility. Although most women are engaged in domestic and traditional jobs, they are still middle income, and this has a significant impact on their productivity and empowerment. The, the effect of health status on women's empowerment. Physical and mental health was also one of the factors that was researched on the women's empowerment. The findings show that the more women have mental health, and the more important it will be uh, um, on their development and empowerment. So, physical health is not as important as mental health for their empowerment. Next slide. The effects of eliminating discrimination for from the labor market on women's empowerment. The level of job discrimination in Afghan societies is still high, and the separation of male and female jobs is itself a significant discrimination. For example, women are more involved in domestic work, and there are opportunities for unequal and unfair employment. So these gender roles are one of the most fundamental factors that under the presence of women in society, and address them as a weak. The effects of eliminating traditional beliefs on women's empowerment. Traditional misconception traditional misconceptions are also factors that have a negative impact on women's empowerment. In this study, a large percentage of women were opposite to traditional beliefs, removing gender stereotypes from textbooks, changing attitude and programs and media, and paying more attention to research on women's issues and problems, and eliminating traditional beliefs. It will be useful. Uh, the next slide is about our research resource. And finally, thank you. If any question, please ask me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to Ms. Hamidi for your presentation. And I would like to again ask if there are any questions.
Mm,
Okay, if there are no questions, we can now move on to our next presentation. I would like to invite our next presenter, Mr. Abdel Fattah Ibrahim Muhammad from Maltepe University, Turkey, to give his presentation titled Global Climate Change and Its Social Costs. The floor is yours.
putting you. Okay. Bye.
Co-president, distinguished members, everyone who is watching us and here, good afternoon to all of you. My name is Abdifitah Ibrahim from Maltepe University, Faculty of Communication, Department of Public Relations and Publicity. Today's topic that I'm going to talk about is global climate change and its social costs. Here a lot that the global climate and temperatures are increasing, and the term climate change is heard more and more. But what exactly is it? Does it exist? What caused it? How can it be solved? These are the vital questions which is needed to be asked before we talk global climate change and its social costs. Climate is a typical or average weather of a certain region. Climate change is whenever it is average weather should substantially over time. So why does this happen? Gases in the atmosphere are increasing average heat on Earth, which causes the greenhouse effect. Our solar radiation is reflected in most of it. It's absorbed by the Earth's surface, which warms it. The concentration of the gases has been rising, which leads to climate change as it is affecting the ozone layer and leaving us exposed to higher ultraviolet to sun radiations. This increasing temperature can lead to changing rain and snow patterns, stronger storm, higher sea levels, warmer oceans, less snow and ice, more droughts and wildfires, and of course, higher temperatures and more heat waves, which increases the chance of more natural disasters, such as hurricanes. They have started to happen more frequently. Hurricanes are formed by the increased temperature in oceans. Hurricanes like Herman Harvey in 2017 that impacted the United States costed between $150 to $200 billion in damage and 215 fatalities in total. Floods like the ones that happened in Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and some South Asian countries where around 40 million people have been affected and 1,300 people were killed, where 30% of them were children. Also, it is estimated that by 2030, floods will cost South Asian governments $215 billion a year. The increasing temperature also causes drought, like a North American drought of 2012 and 2013, which occurred in the midst of a record-breaking heat wave. And the similar cost was $56 billion and led to 17,000 fatalities. Also, droughts still have an impact on African countries, which is caused by the increasing temperature. More than 13 million people are facing severe food insecurity. due to drought in parts of Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia. Around 5.7 million children from these three countries are expected to be acutely and extremely malnourished while not getting enough nutrients the end of 2022. All these problems and the impact will not remain or faced only the countries that I mentioned, but it will be global unless action is taken. Dear members and friends, the world is more interdependent today than before. The problem that existed in one place can immediately spread and reach other places and have an effect on it, such as wars. We see a war that is existing in one country can affect other countries. We see the pandemic. It started from one place, but it has affected and reached the whole world. We have seen how was it. Global climate change is more severe and worse than the pandemic we have seen it. As in greenhouse gas emission by humans increase, the temperature increases leading to a market failure. Greenhouse gases emissions are a side effect on economically valuable activities. They cause climate change by trapping heat. And they also contribute to respiratory disease from smoke and air pollution. Extreme weather, food supply disruptions, and increased wildfires are effects of climate change caused by greenhouse gases. So all these can affect economical activities and lead to market failure. As you know, my friends and dear members, there's no business on a dead planet. That's why market failure will exist. So, if there is no business and no trade, since the planet is dead, no country will be able to export or import their goods in terms of food supply, because what we are living on is natural resources that we are damaging today. Anything that happened to us is what is caused by us. We humans, we the people, and there's no problem that can come to us unless we cause it by our own hands. Global climate change is a result of the hurt and the damage we did to this earth and its well-being. That's why this problem is still exists. To solve this problem, our support for the environment we inhabit is required and it's inevitable. Hence, it's the only way we and the environment we live can survive. Cleaner energy infrastructure and transportation upgrade can potentially reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Save energy at home. Much of our electricity and heat is powered by coal, oil, and gas. Use less energy by lowering your heating and cooling. switching to light bulbs and energy, washing your laundry with cold water or hanging things to dry instead of using a dryer. Walk, cycle, or take public transport. The roads today are blocked with vehicles. We see a lot of cars on the roads where traffic jam is caused. Most of them, they are burning diesel and petrol. They send to the air where climate and global warming happen and cause diseases such as our respiratory system. Walking or riding a bike instead of driving will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help your health and fitness. For longer distances, consider taking a train or bus whenever possible and leave your car at home. Recycle your home's wastes, such as plastic water bottles, cartons, paper, office, and so on. Avoid all pollutions that can harm the environment we inhabit. Do not cut trees and deforestate the environment, since it will increase the carbon dioxide, also increasing global warming. Cutting trees destroys the habitat of animals and birds, causes floods and fires, which may hurt economic prosperity more directly. This is how we can support our world and solve the problem that is facing, which is global climate change. My friends, please note that what we say from here does matter. How we inform to our public does matter. Any support we contribute, less or more, does matter. Our idea does matter. Since the problem is caused by us, we may be able to solve it. It concerns us and our descendants, our coming generations. There's no way to achieve victory unless we unite to solve the problem that exists. So, take action. The first move should start from us. I conclude my presentation here. Dear members and co-president, thank you so much for your kind attention.
I'd like to thank you, Mr. Abdel Fattah, for your presentation. And I believe that global climate change is an issue and that we must change our behaviors. So, for now, are there any questions? If there are no questions, then we can move on to our next presentation. I'd like to now invite Mr. Rovik Kagoisa. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Alea Era, Nashreen Gurney, Umar James Liro, and Magia Ariane Maranon, and Janelle Molina from Polytechnic University of the Philippines. Their presentation is titled 6 Feet Apart or 6 Feet Under, the narrative case study on the experiences of Filipino families living in dense community during the COVID-19 pandemic. The floor is yours.
Kami na! RH. Presentation.
All right. Hoping that all things visible. Is it seen already?
Not yet.
All right. Okay, one moment. Currently having technical problems when it comes to sharing the slide. Just give me a second. Okay. How about now? Can you see it?
There's nothing on the screen.
All right. Just a moment. Pretty much the visuals of our presentation is essential for you to really understand our study. So apologies if it's taking up much time, but we would really love to show you the slides that we have made for better understanding. So just a moment. Uh,
Plus the slides or send us the
trying
slides.
to,
We can
yes.
put them on for you.
All right, sure thing. We'll be sending the link. If you may, can kindly send Alea. Thank you
Okay,
so much.
no problem.
Apologies for that. Okay, we'll probably be sending it via WhatsApp. Thank you so much for your patience. And we're super happy that we actually made it for uh, this presentation. So thank you. Okay, sending the link right now through WhatsApp. Okay, over here. Send it via the group chat. Please do let me know if you're able to access it. Okay. And while we are waiting for the slides, also, I'd like to introduce my group mates over here. We have Alea Era, Cyber Kakisa, Janelle Molina, Nate Werne, and coming in also is another group mate of ours, Omar Lero. And we all come in from Polytechnic University of the Philippines. And we are all BA Communication Research students. And we really take passion in social sciences and other fields of study as well. So it's a pretty much exciting thing for us to be here uh, in this presentation. By the way, I've already sent the link also on the WhatsApp chat. Okay. Okay. Currently at the backstage also is one of. Okay, perfect. Yay. But we just like to request one of our group mates is still on the backstage, named Omar James. He's also part of our team. Now, great. Now we're good to go. Thank you so much for your patience. Let's hit it on. Yep, that's the slide. Janelle, I think you can take your cue already.
Or can I make it full screen so that you can maximize the space for the PowerPoint?
Thank you so much.
Right. All right. Thank you so much. So again, I'm Janelle Molina and I will be the first presenter for our paper. So I'll start now. Throughout the years, the time has proven that pandemics meant disturbance of world economy, decay of securities, exchanges, shortage of provision, deteriorating political security, and the government losing many billions of income. Next slide, please. When the COVID-19 came, developing countries like the Philippines instantly became one of the most vulnerable to these repercussions. Lack of income opportunities and reduction of pay had worsened significantly. More so, the continuous insufficient food supply, health sanitation, and nutrition issues. Next slide, please. COVID-19 has immensely changed our daily lifestyles. According to Meta 2020, social distancing has altered the use of space. His study reported that residents living in mid to low density places are generating a new sociable space by repurposing and transforming neighborhoods for active living, play, and sociability. People are both extending social space and engaging public distances to create a more sociable experience. Sadly, this is only true for some. Next slide, please. In the aerial view of the metros in the Philippines, there seems to be a different kind of social distancing observed. The kind of segregation that transcends the utilization of space. It is the divide between the rich and the poor, the neighborhoods, their quality of living, and the survival against a global health crisis. In the mid to low density places, social distancing is quite easy. But what about the income-poor communities living in highly dense neighborhoods? What are their narratives of coping and combating a social-spatial phenomenon like COVID-19? Next slide, please. Today, together with our team, we present our paper titled Pamilyang 6 Feet Apart or 6 Feet Under, a narrative case study on the experiences of Filipino families living in dense community during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Next slide, please. And that's the title of our paper. And next slide, please. In the Philippines, there is a strict implementation of health protocols. Spatial conflict inside the household in highly dense communities reinforces mobility constraints, corresponding to the socio-spatial inequalities in the urban. This is potentially detrimental to the significant effort in combating COVID-19 virus. Hence, in our study, next slide please, we answered the question, how does the COVID-19 pandemic affect the living condition of Filipino families? Next slide, please. Specifically, first, situating their living space condition. Next, finding out Filipino income poor household understanding of selected COVID-19 related information. Then, explaining practices of Filipino income poor household founded, next slide please, founded on their proxemics and understanding of COVID-19 related information. Then finally, manifesting emerging themes of the plight of Filipino income for household and the pandemic. We have ground our study, next slide please, with the synergy of proxemic theory and the ever-reflexive narrative paradigm. Proxemic theory state that human perception of space are molded by and patterned by culture. This theory will be the indicator of intra-household spatial adaptation during the global contagion. Meanwhile, the narrative paradigm stresses the story in our lived experiences and our nature to communicate those stories to others. Hence, Fisher proposes evaluating narratives according to the consistency and the resonance of it to others. This led us to interpret narrative grounded on the spatial relation experienced by Filipino income for families in dense communities during the pandemic. Next slide, please. Now, with our method, we utilize a narrative case study qualitative design that is primarily said to capture a phenomena that might not be understood as readily through other means of study. Then, through the use of criterion sampling, a community in Tondo, Manila met the set criteria as the study locale. Next slide, please. Then, due to the constraints of pandemic, in-depth online interview among purposefully sampled 9 head of the household were conducted specifically via Zoom. And who are they? As you can see on the slide, their aliases and also their profile. Disclaimer, all of the photos used was only for representational purposes. And after the series of analysis, 3 main findings emerged.
Next slide, please. All right, so the first dominant theme is the Filipino income for household living space condition. Next slide. Upon characterizing the living space conditions of the study participants, 5 highlighted observations have emerged. Next slide, please. First is that the average number of household members ranges from 9 to 15 due to the additional extended family members with the household. Second, the family roles among the family members are evident, and the heads of the household may not directly equate to whom the principal earner is, but also to the person responsible for the overall household management. Next slide. Third, livelihood among study participants have been dramatically affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Aided by the government aid, some claim that the aid was not enough. Nevertheless, these families still display gratitude towards the government's financial assistance and have developed coping techniques by limiting the family's budget. Next slide. Fourth, available domestic spaces of household manifest their financial realities. Apparent space restriction between families who share the household space divided into partitions made it difficult for them to cope with the protocols and health guidelines of COVID-19 inside their houses. Next slide, please. Overall, in terms of household living space condition, narratives of the study participants exhibited spatial restrictions on both the domestic and dense urban community living conditions.
Okay. The second dominant theme understanding is about COVID-19 related information. Internalization of pandemic information, such as the key informants' understanding of lockdown, social distancing, general COVID-19 pathology, and personal protective equipment practices. Post studies measured and documented the initial level of knowledge on the coronavirus, its pathology or contagion, preventative behaviors, and perceived risk. When it comes to lockdown, key informants provided insights grounded on the articulation of understanding specific COVID-19 related information. Traditional media such as television and radio remains the common and prepared pipeline of information. Findings also reveal that there is an apparent trust among key informants to those who have authoritative power. When it comes to social distancing, key informants are unsure if their understanding of related terms equates their meaning. There is an alarming amount of low quality and frequently directly harmful information about pandemic. Understanding rooted in the snapshot of memories and experiences aids the informants in deeply understanding the pandemic-related information. Okay, apologies. Next slide, please. In terms of understanding COVID-19 pathology, key informants appear to have contrasting dispositions and cognizance toward the COVID-19 pandemic. They have different perspectives on prevention measures, but some believe in conspiracy theories. Okay, stay on the slide, please. The global spread of COVID-19 has been mirrored by the spread of deception and paranoid fears about its origins. Okay, kindly go back to the slide, please. Okay. Finally, go back. Okay. Finally, understanding personal protective equipment or PPE articulation and internalization of its purpose, utility, and implementation are observed through narrativizing COVID-19 pathology itself. Kindly back to the previous slide, please. Thank you. Essentializing the protective and preventive aspects of PPE, informants deeply understand the grand purposes and the utility of pandemic-related information, but articulating the nuances and the particularity of the semantics of pandemic terminologies and neologisms were difficult and confusing among informants living in the dense communities. These findings provide a serious implication rather for the development of critical, pragmatic place-based communication and information campaigns and protocols that aim to foster a contextual and empathetic ecosystem of health and risk information.
The third dominant theme is the living house condition and application of COVID-19 practices. With this study being grounded on the proxemics theory, it is essential to analyze their living spaces, including their setup and condition. From the statements of the participants, there were practices heavily grounded on the condition of their house, specifically with its area and proximity to neighbors and hospitals or health centers. With this, four observations have emerged. First, on compliance with health protocols. Next slide, please. It was observed that the key informants based their compliance and non-compliance pragmatically to appease their comfort within their deprived condition in the workplace or inside the household. For instance, non-compliance on mask wearing inside the house and in the workplace resulted from the suffocating substance of homes and poor working conditions. The lack of household space have prompted the inability to adhere with mandated isolation protocols. Further, as the participants share their space with extended families, it is unavoidable to share household amenities that compromise strict compliance on health protocols. Second, on inter-household response and arrangements, findings reveal that in an attempt to mitigate the COVID-19 symptoms, the heads of households displayed a strong sense of obedience as the best COVID-19 response. Further in the narrative, it is important to note that self-medication is widespread among the participants due to their fear of incurring expenditures if they are diagnosed as COVID-19 positive. Next slide, please. Third, on struggles in PPEs and stay at home directives. The struggles highlighted are both financial and spatial in nature. The key informant's articulation on the understanding of PPE practices is grounded on the condition of their daily life and their socioeconomic status as the pedestal of their struggles. In addition, residents living in mid to low density places are generating a new sociable space by repurposing residential streets, sidewalks, parking lots, and other spaces and transforming neighborhood spaces for active living, play, and sociability. Lastly, on pandemic sentiments. With the changes in proxemics, scholars have noted triggers for emotional responses like pleasure, fear, anxiety, and anger, or even serious diseases like depression and loneliness induced stress. The participants have displayed fear as their primary driving emotion to take action while simultaneously coping with financial instability incurred by purchasing PPEs. Overall, These findings presents a strong argument against the deviant archetype that dominated the crisis communication in the country. The participants have demonstrated basic understanding of health messages and strong willingness to comply to the implemented health standards. But their everyday living conditions consistently provide barriers that propels the need for an inclusive crisis response.
Now, from all of these findings, we have arrived with these conclusions that you are now seeing on the screen. First, Filipinos living in previous slide, please, Ray. Okay, thank you. Now, Filipinos living in densely populated areas adapt for a certain period of time. So probably because of their existing conditions, they already know how to get by. However, this is not sustainable, which is why there's a need for institutionalized safety nets. Second, participants openly expressed that they were afraid during the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that is because they were financially unstable and the possible virus transmission. And with that, fear was observed to be one of the dominant emotions among them. But with proper risk communication and robust pandemic economic response, all of these emotions can actually be managed. Now, in terms of proxemics, there's a lack of personal space due to sharing of spaces and utilities between and even among families. This then reduces the possibility of home isolation between the family members and subtenants or close relatives and the strict implementation of social distancing or when using shared CRs or comfort rooms. Lastly, there's an abundance of COVID 19 information being shared to the Filipino households. There's no doubt about that. However, the efficacy isn't guaranteed since they are having difficulties when it comes to remembering the technical terms. Now, you may notice that these conclusions seem to be quite negative, but there are actually ways to move forward by taking some action steps, such as the ones that you're going to see on the next slide. Now, some of the things that we can do is first to take these findings as guide to craft place-based policies for a national or local government, which can also apply pretty much to any country, not only in the Philippines. Second, crafting better health messages by remembering that digestibility should go hand in hand with credibility of information. It's important that we put out credible information, but we have to remember people should be able to digest it, people should be able to understand it. And lastly, further studies may also be done using other approaches, ethnographic approach, or even other theoretical lenses. Overall, during the conduct of this study, the critical insights amplified the necessity of social and economic justice. And the rich experiences of the people that we have talked to on their resistance and adaptation generated counter narratives against the unjust power and the facade of upward mobility that cyclically affects the Filipino poor. And that concludes our presentation. And if you do have any further questions, feel free to ask them away. Thank you so much.
Okay, I'd like to thank you and your team for all your impactful presentation. And I think we can all agree that COVID-19 has caused a great impact in our lives and changed it drastically. So I'd like to thank you all again and ask if there are any questions. If there are none, we will now take a 10-minute break and be back soon. Thank you all. Sorry, not 10, 5.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, welcome back. Now, last but not least, we will take the final presentation of the second session, which is going to be presented by Elvig Wagista, Alea Era, Shireen Gurney, Omar James Piro, and Magia Arian, Aran, and Janelle Molina. Sorry for any mispronunciation. From Polytechnic University of the Philippines with their presentation titled Thesis on Face Catastrophe, Politeness in President Tutori's Late Night Public Address. Talk to the people on coronavirus disease 2020. The floor is yours.
Can you see my slide? Sorry, I can't see anything. Just the slide. So I just want to know if
We can see the slides.
all right. Okay, so it's me again. I'm Janelle Molina, and I will be presenting. I will start presenting now. In March 2020, we were struck by a news that completely changed our lives up to the present time. Without a doubt, the pandemic exceptionally altered our lifestyles, which now include social distancing, mask wearing, frequent hand washing, social isolation, and candles scattered all over our news feeds almost every day. As UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed said, and I quote, "Our social fabric and cohesion is under stress. We are now facing a human crisis unlike any we have experienced." And just like every crisis, it could make or break a leader, which in turn could shatter an organization or worse, the whole future of a country. In a state crisis like COVID-19, communication and coordination with different sectors and the general public is critical to public service. Dong 2019 stated that a public crisis is essentially a rhetorical problem in a world-based society. Luke, meanwhile, said that leadership and rhetoric have always been inextricably intertwined, since a leader's message can dramatically influence the course of events to a staggering degree. Living every day with the lurking enemy fuels uncertainty. What people need most in the midst of a crisis is a leader they can trust and will address their needs. But how exactly does trust play in the face of a crisis? To put more specifically, in the field of crisis communication. Today, together with our team, we'll attempt to shed light about the catexis on face it catastrophe, politeness in President Duterte's late-night public address, talk to the people on coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19.
According to DiMaggio and Powell, a crisis could cause reputational damage. And this is the reason why crisis response tactics are done to minimize reputational damage. Crisis calm is also done to regain stakeholders' trust. And given all these factors, the lack of response or failure to choose the appropriate crisis response may put the leader's public image in a bad light. And this is where the concept of face comes in. And this was defined by Brown and Levinson as one to be maintained or improved. This is the positive and negative face that you're going to see right now on the screen. Now, how do we maintain or improve this desired face? This is where politeness comes in. But the real question is, was President Duterte polite? Was he using the usual respectful Filipino utterances like po and opo? throughout the speech. Well, truth is, he really doesn't. And this is because politeness in the context of Brown is quite different. It does not talk about paggalang or respect as a Filipino culture. It is the concept of maintaining a face and was back then used for small, informal, and interpersonal communication. And you're gonna see also that there are different politeness strategies, but we only focus on two. To maintain the positive face, right there, next slide, which is the desire to be liked by everybody. An individual employs the following positive politeness sub-strategies. And to maintain the negative face, which is oriented to set an individual boundary to not get stomped on by others, the following negative politeness strategies are used. And with all of this, our goal is simply to answer this question. How do we apply this to the Philippine context during the pandemic?
By looking at the most trending of all time late night public addresses in accordance with the Presidential Communications Operations Office website or PCOO, we employed qualitative textual analysis. Just a note that we analyze one speech to serve as a stepping stone to explore if there are politeness strategies that President Duterte used, whether negative or positive, in addressing COVID-19. In this speech, President Rodrigo Duterte addresses the nation Friday, April 24, amid the extended Luzon lockdown and coronavirus outbreak in the country. Throughout the process of our research, the first step we did was to identify emerging themes. Contrary of these, as you can see on the screen, those pile of screenshots, if we really go through in the textual analysis, turns out there are actually four themes that emerge and several politeness sub-strategies that have been used by the Philippine president rather. Of course, there's COVID-19 response. Okay. Other themes include stock with new people's army, preemption of martial law, and expectations of power and responsibilities. After the long coding and categorization, we have found out that President Duterte used positive politeness sub-strategies most heavily, which shows consistency with the findings of Torres and Adele et al. It is really fit to use the politeness strategies rather, when it comes to gaining the trust of stakeholders, which is in this context the Filipino people. Indeed, reassurance emerged from President Duterte, but we noticed that he resorted to apologizing and avoiding disagreements several times throughout the speech, which are negative politeness sub-strategies. So, instead of laying down recovery strategies, President Duterte focused more on the individual actions that citizens must take in combating the crisis. There is also a pattern that we observe of Duterte uttering grand vows for the public and attempting to be transparent by admitting that they cannot control the crisis. In short, it is what it is. With this, apologizing and scapegoating are intended to grasp public trust, wherein Brooks et al. 2013 stated that reluctant apologizing is used to create a facade of transparency to cover lapses and mistakes from greater exposure. The observed pattern opens for a populist rhetoric wherein typically a populist leader appeals to the people's grievances, and this context their uncertainty and the essential threat of the pandemic.
And now, what about this? And there are 3 points. Number one, take note, crisis can happen at any time and can happen simultaneously. And as a country with various vulnerabilities and risks from our natural location, messages influenced by socio-political factors may contribute to the decision making on crises like COVID-19. Crisis communication is crucial as well-crafted messages can change the track of the nation's resolution and mitigation towards it. Number two, emerging rhetorical implication of the politeness strategies in the public address transcend beyond the crisis itself. And why? Emerging themes were found to cater to the image maintenance of Duterte. This event can be a playground of political opportunism. Duterte's populist attributes manifest in his politeness strategy. Number three, crisis itself can test the state ability to mitigate crisis by looking at the political messages of a leader as its constituents' life are at stake. plus exposing the maladies of power, pointing to such texts or to such focus to state legitimization of social debt among its citizens. With all we have learned, more research on comparative analysis of speeches would add rigor to the study and also would validate all politeness theory constructs, including other politeness strategies. This implied that further contextualization of politeness theories in local settings is possible given the lack of local literature on Filipino politeness speech dynamics. Thus, looking at the theories and perspective on Philippine studies would further help future researchers. Thank you so much. That's wrap up our presentation on catexis on face, politeness on Duterte's speech.
Okay, I'd like to give a big thank you to everybody on your team for your presentation and ask if there are any questions. So if there are no questions, I'd now like to end the second session by again giving a big thank you to all our participants for their presentations. And with this, we have completed the second session of the day. After a 10-minute break, we'll return and continue on with the third session of the Congress. See you all and goodbye.